It's lonely out in the ocean, especially at night when the only light you have is from the stars and your own weak lights. The darkness comes in, oppressing everything and taking over like a scourge, nothing but pure black on a cloudy night. I thought that I had seen the worst isolation that the world could offer, working at the Palmer Station in the Antarctic. At least it wasn't as cold out here at Point Nemo, I guess. The furthest point on Earth from any land in every single direction, Point Nemo might be one of the most remote locations on Earth with a population of 0, most of the time at least. There's a small research rig out there, not quite as big as an oil platform but decent enough sized. I got an offer a couple of years back to go out there and do some studies on the ocean biology out there. Since Nemo is so remote with relatively stagnant currents, there's a surprising lack of biological life out there. Honestly, it was exciting just for the chance to say that I've been to one of the most secluded places on Earth. Getting to study the biome and sea life that was there though, I was over the moon. Ecstatic was the understatement of the century. I arrived in the platform a couple of clicks away from the actual point geographically early in the morning. Clear skies were reflecting off gentle waves in every direction. The deep blue of the ocean here was beautiful, virtually unmarred by human intervention. If anything else, I got some time to read in relative solitude while I was off duty. There were 5 of us at the station. An older guy called Flam was the lead researcher. I don't know how he got the name either. There were 2 assistant researchers, Shannon, a woman in her mid-30s, and Hap, a younger man with a specialty in deep-sea biology. The last person was a mechanic, Sandy, who made sure the everyday maintenance of the rig was maintained. And I was the happiest person in the world stepping off the chopper and meeting everyone, getting the full tour of the base including the rec room, gym, mess hall, 3 separate labs, and a surprisingly cozy library. Everybody was nice enough, though Flam was a little neurotic to say the least. It's probably important to mention how this place was set up. If you've ever seen a free-floating oil rig, it's a lot like that, just without the ecological destruction. Think of it like a very large ship supported by pontoons, with some parts extending under the water with a larger building up top. What you would call the ground floor is the mess hall, the rec room, and gym, with the labs on top and the library nestled in the center of them. Our barracks were below sea level, extending down with the maintenance area underneath housing generators, gas, etc. It was a nice place, all things considered. A cabin in the middle of the ocean, basically. Settling in that first night was rough. Sleeping underwater essentially was a little terrifying, kind of claustrophobic, and completely nauseating. Despite the large pontoons holding us up, the waves still rocked us, making me feel my welcome dinner warming up for an encore as I swayed. Sandy came walking through, going to the shared bathroom between our rooms. "You all right, Ellie?" she asked, looking concerned. All I could do was shake my head, making the nausea take hold harder in the process. Oh God. She was watching while I puked into a trash can. Hell of a way to make new friends, Ellie. I was surprised when she walked over and grabbed my loose hair, holding it back and rubbing my back with her other hand, gently soothing me as I evacuated everything that I ate today. All good. Happens to everyone on the first day. Oh, please tell me it gets better, I said, gasping for breath and only getting the stench of vomit back. Oh yeah, I just need to adjust. Come on up to the deck and get some air though, it helps. She led me up, walking single file on the narrow staircase. I bumped my shoulders countless times, unsteadied by the surf moving us. At one point I started falling back, losing my balance and reaching out to steady myself, but only swiped the empty wall. Suddenly her hand darted out, grabbing my forearm and steadying me. She pulled me back to the step, making sure that I was upright before moving further, now holding onto my hand as guidance. Soon she was chuckling. "Hope you're better above deck than you are below." "Yeah, you and me both." I gagged again, just trying to talk, my head still spinning. The fresh salt air when we had emerged from the outer door onto the wraparound platform was like opening a valve for me. I was taking in the deepest breaths that I could, finally clearing out the vomit smell stuck in my nose. She leads me over to the platform railing, the dark night settling in around us. I was immediately distracted from my nausea by the beauty in the sky above. There were a decent amount of clouds covering the sky, but what wasn't covered was some of the most amazing stargazing that I had ever been privy to. Every single constellation was clearly definable beyond the clouds, with the full moon shining through, sending light in patches to reflect off the water. An infinite sea of stars in every direction. It was beautiful, something that's only on par with seeing the northern lights in their full glory as far as I've seen. Even in the imposing dark out at Point Nemo, millions of points of light shone through. "What's that?" I said, noticing movement against the water. At first, it looked like the shadow from a cloud passing over, disturbing the stars below. And then a cloud moved from in front of the moon, casting bright light down in all directions. I could see clearly that it wasn't a shadow, but a giant, walking through the ocean step by step. From the distance, it was maybe 5 clicks out. Even then, I could make out its features clearly thanks to the size. It towered larger than a skyscraper by my best estimate. Each leg had water reaching up to around the knee. It honestly looked like it was going to break the clouds with its head, but it paid no mind as it whipped them away. Oh my God. I was speechless. I don't know if Sandy was too, but she was staring off into the distance alongside me. If she was shocked, nothing showed on her face, but there was the faintest of smiles hiding underneath. "Your guess is as good as mine, science girl," Sandy replied. I could see clearer now that more were walking behind it, heading to the west of us in a straight path. We'll need to go downstairs before the waves reach us though. Sucks for this to happen on your first night. "What? You've seen this before?" I asked, still not tearing my eyes away. The giants were humanoid in build, just like massive versions of people. Their faces were a little more odd. Eyes were larger than normal proportions, and there was a smile on their small mouths that looked like the head was deflating from the bottom like a balloon. I didn't even realize that I was shouting when I started talking to her again, gesturing at the Goliaths waiting by. They're massive. How is something this big physically possible? This completely disregards every single law of physics. "I just run the machines," she shouted back. "Come on, let's go inside before we get completely soaked." Oh God, now I could see what she meant. Every step they took was sending waves our way, crashing into each other as rambling gates tried to overtake each other. Sea foam was high in the air, and at one point while backing up to the door, I swear that I felt the water spray from overhead like a spring shower. One of them turned, looking directly at me. I swear my heart stopped, breath catching as I caught a full view of the face. I was frozen, paralyzed that it was going to come for me now. Just pick me up and pop me in its mouth like a snack before dinner. The deflated smile just kept on, now widening to show toothless gums. I could hear Sandy behind me yelling to come with her and that we were in danger, but I couldn't break eye contact with the giant. Something ancient was holding me in place, frozen and waiting to be devoured. And then Sandy pulled me back, still trembling at the behemoths as they walked away to whatever strange destination would host them. The door was barely closed, but I could still see the one who was looking at me as it turned to follow the others, massive waves sloshing our way as it came. Suddenly, Sandy braced her and me both against the wall, holding on. That's forward," I said, not looking her right in the eyes, my hands pressed into the narrow wall behind her. I was still trembling, elbows refusing to stay still as I pushed against the wall harder. Not gonna lie though, she was a much better sight to be face to face with than the giants. "Sorry about that, you'll thank me," she said, barely finishing the sentence before the entire base was hit hard, turning into a steep angle that sent me falling forward into her even more. Another wave hit, bouncing us briefly into the air as we braced ourselves, trying to not fall down the tight staircase. We tilted back, standing upright once more though swaying heavily, now back to a calmer sea. and best to get back to our rooms before the next patch hits. We scurried back quickly, nausea coming back to me. I couldn't tell if it was that or the contact that we just had that was making me warm, blushing as we walked into the small hallway adjoining our rooms. I sat in my bunk, looking at her still standing in the doorway. What are those things? I wanted a straight answer, though I don't know if she had one. Like, they were giants, I get that, but what did I just see? That beats me. None of us have been able to figure it out. She shrugged, leaning against the doorway now. You'll see a lot of weird stuff out here. Don't know if the others told you that up front, but they're a bunch of hardcore skeptics anyway. So they've seen it too and didn't think that they should maybe tell the new girl about it. What if I was out there alone? I would have died. I was almost screaming, now terrified at the proposition of spending 6 months here. Please, they try to tell me it's a trick of the light in isolation. Hell, I thought maybe I was going crazy, but you've helped me out there big time. I finally have a second witness, she said, raising her hands in exasperation. God damn, it feels gratifying to not be gaslit into thinking that I'm losing my mind. I imagine, I said, trying to calm down and not get too overwhelmed this far in. My nausea was still beating at me, making my gag reflex go wild again. This time, I'm not entirely sure it was the waves causing it though. I was still coming to grips with seeing giants walking through the ocean. And not to mention the dread that it was causing was worse than I've felt since grad school. She sat down beside me, handing over the trash can once more. Another huge wave rocked us, sending me flying forward into the wall. I don't know, think maybe since this place is so far from people that it's where old things go to hide or to be alone. Though some of these things should be left well enough alone, she said, picking me up as the second wave rocked us back. Nothing that I've found is too dangerous though, so we've got some peace of mind. God, if that's considered not dangerous, I'm afraid to see what else there is, I said, curling up in my bunk and pulling my knees to my chest. I was still warm with the ventilation on the station feeling more like stale air being fed back through. She only smiled back, giving me a brief goodnight before heading into her own room and closing the door. It took me hours to drift off. Waves kept assailing us through the night, and eventually, I tied myself to the bunk using my blanket to at least try to stay in place. Unfortunately, it didn't do anything for the nausea, which came and went all night. And every few minutes, a smaller wave would rock us, making me fear that one of those things was on their way to stomp us into the depths. Finally, almost asleep, their faces stared me down from behind my eyelids, like the balloons deflating or even just ready to pop right from their bulging eyes as they smiled away. Those eyes had something behind them, not malice, at least I don't think so. Apathy might have been more fitting. Every time I remember the one that looked at me, making eye contact with pupils the size of cruise ships. It was like a god studying an ant. I was just a bug in their environment, no better than something they would step on during their journey, moving on without guilt. How old does something have to be to get that big? Could these things be older than any of the history we've discovered yet? Good God, my mind wouldn't let me sleep almost as much as the nausea. It was the early hours of the morning before I was finally out, and thank God the others must have seen that I was exhausted. Though only Sandy knew that it wasn't just because of the waves. When I got up the next morning, still groggy as hell and searching desperately for the coffee pot, I noticed that we had portholes along the outer walls of the living quarters. Maybe it was just too dark to notice before, but after finally getting coffee in my system, I decided to take a look out. At least to assure myself the ocean outside wasn't out to get me. Everything that we knew about Point Nemo so far was that it was a lifeless, for the most part, stretch of ocean. Even just looking at the sun filtering through the water is relaxing for me, so I had some hope. Pulling up a chair, I settled in next to the window. Thanks to the shallow depth, it was large enough to get a good view all around, and even bubbles out of the side a little so you have some peripheral vision. Small strands of sunlight piercing the surface finally gave me some soothing, relaxation setting in. I was drifting off, gazing out into the blue wonder when it opened. If it was one of the giants, I'm not entirely sure. A huge eye was staring me down through the porthole, two irises meeting in the middle of it to pierce right through the porthole and through me. I felt the same primal fear that had set in the night before, but this one wasn't like the giants. I felt malice in this, studying the entire base like we were the ones being researched. It didn't hit me until a moment later how massive it must have been, only the deep yellow surrounding the irises to tell me how far away this leviathan was. Despite the distance, I could make out every feature.
The depths welcome you.
I didn't hear it necessarily. It was like an intrusive thought entering my mind as the irises pulsated, dilating to get a better look at me. Primal fear set in again, telling every nerve in my body to run. Too bad there's nowhere to run in the middle of the ocean. Don't look at it. Sandy was suddenly beside me, snapping the cover shut on the porthole with a quick slam. Huh? I was back, the chill still working its way down my back as I came back to the dry confines of the base. Just don't look at it. It says some awful things, she said, not looking me right in the eyes, more serious than I had seen her even with the giants. That thing is different from the others. I've only ever seen the eye, but I don't know. I think making eye contact with it is like an invitation. Just don't do it to be safe. I didn't even have words at this point. I was one day in, already with most of my assumedly broad knowledge and understanding of the world in shambles. Everything that I was here for felt secondary, pointless research on algae and ocean bacteria, when I might as well have seen a god just hours ago. My anxiety and dread were vying for control of every brain cell, and I was the only loser here. Giants were simple, honestly, though I can feel the chill of empty ocean spray to this day, freezing my bones at the thought. If they were the extent of what I saw, it would have been fine, but there's nothing normal in the middle of the ocean. These 6 months that I spent there felt like they alternated between blissful dreams and the worst fever nightmares that I've ever had. A couple of weeks passed without incident. I got deep into my research, taking water samples, testing the amount of microorganisms and other boring science stuff that I know nobody reading really cares about. I was starting to get more familiar with the rig and those on it, though it was taking some getting used to. Flam was, well, Flam. He was a weird dude, extremely neurotic and always seemed like he was spaced out. Shannon was uptight as hell, usually more likely to be upset at anyone in range than to be anywhere near helpful. Hap was nice though, but I think he kept trying to awkwardly hit on me without realizing that I wasn't too interested in men. Can't say that I blame him though, it gets lonely out here. Sandy ended up being one of my greatest comforts out on the cold ocean. In the evenings, we would sit out on the platform watching waves pass by as the sun set on the horizon. Despite everything that I had seen out here so far, it was calming, almost serene when it looked like this. I was losing myself in the sunset, gazing off into the distance when suddenly a skunky smell hit me, almost knocking me back to my college days. "How did you get weed out here?" I asked, turning to look at her lighting up a joint. All she did was laugh at me. "Why, are you a cop now?" she said back. We passed it back and forth, laughing as the plant took more of an effect. At some point, Shannon walked out, though all she could do was be disapproving and tell us that we shouldn't be doing that here. Sandy's retort made me laugh even harder. "We're on maritime law, babe. Nothing is illegal out here." Shannon only shook her head, looking directly at me before walking down to the living quarters. "Remember, we're taking a dive tomorrow morning. I don't want you screwed up when we go down." I saluted, giving a stiff, "Aye, Captain," as she walked off in a huff. "You nervous about going down there?" Sandy asked me now, getting serious again. "A little bit. I know that we're not going too deep for this one, but it's still a little terrifying, you know," I replied, looking at the reflecting sun as it dipped below the horizon line. In a little over 12 hours, I would be taking our small submersible down to the Twilight Zone, almost 2,000 meters, to see what kind of organic life is down there. I might have been a little excited because there was always the possibility of discovering some new species. I wonder if they would name it after me. Sandy and I shot the shit for a while longer before finally heading to bed, hoping to get some at least decent sleep before reaching the dark depths. I slept fitfully that night, in fear of what we might find down there. I hadn't seen the giants again, but that giant eye through the porthole the other day was still haunting me every time I tried to close my eyes. All I could hear was its voice, telling me to join them in the depths. After one of the worst nights of sleep that I've ever had, we started loading in. The submersible was cramped, with the stale air being pumped through for ventilation that left me sweating. Flam and I went down together, with Shannon and Hap staying back up with Sandy as our comms. The only window was at the very front, a small porthole with an incredibly limited view of only what was directly ahead. Maybe the worst part was that other than the console lights and a couple of low red accent lights to see by, this thing was completely dark. I felt like I was crammed into a can, and my claustrophobia was not doing well. The descent was fine, nothing out of the ordinary at least. We went in phases to be safe, dropping a few hundred meters at a time before stopping for a few minutes, making sure that there weren't any issues with the submersible. I kept looking over at the small hatch that we had clambered in through, a bulkhead and multiple thick seals keeping us from the massive pressure outside. Every creak this thing made as we descended, I expected to be liquefied where I sat, lost forever to the depths outside. Even in the stuffy air of the sub, I was getting a chill. Approaching 1,500 meters. Shannon's voice coming over the small radio. Reaching target depth in about 5 minutes. Thank you, Flam said, flipping a couple of switches and pushing the shift further. I don't know if that's what it was, but it looked like there was a flight stick installed to control this thing. Better than an Xbox controller, but still. Ellie, turn on the outside cameras, please. Copy that, I said, flipping around buttons in front of me. The 3 screens in front of me flashed on, 8 different feeds popping up. We had wide-angle cameras on the port and starboard side, one at the top and bottom of each end of the sub. All of the corners were covered, giving us a full view of everything within our radius. Cameras on, powering on lights. The lights outside came on, flooding the ocean darkness around us. Despite the output of the lights, strong enough to light a dang fire back on land if you left it on it for too long, we were only able to pierce the abyss so far before losing sight. And that was when I saw movement right off the edge of our front starboard camera. My heart skipped a beat, amazed that we had found something already as we had barely reached depth at this point. There's something out front. Go forward towards starboard. I told Flam, trying to study what was there just at the edge of our visibility. Flam moved us forward slowly so as to not scare whatever it was off. Unfortunately, whatever it was had dashed away, but on the screen as it ran away, it almost looked humanoid, dashing off like an Olympic swimmer. Did you see that? Yeah, it's much faster than us though, Flam said, still pushing the flight stick down, propelling us deeper. Still not there yet. We're at 2,000, Flam. I think we're deep enough for what we're after, I said, looking over at him with anxiety rising. How much is this thing rated for? 5,000 meters, he replied, muttering some sort of calculations under his breath while still descending. I know we'll find it. Shannon, Flam is going even deeper, I said, breathless into my radio. My heartbeat was picking up, tension rising as Flam didn't even react to my message. Any idea what's going on? Flam, where are you going? Shannon asked, concern rising in her voice. You need to come back to target depth. We haven't done prep for a deeper dive right now. We'll come back up quickly. I just need to check something, Flam muttered again, flipping the radio off so that Shannon couldn't interject. Whoa, okay, Flam, we need to go back up. You're not thinking straight, I said, moving forward to flip the walkie back on. He smacked my hand away, turning with a wild eye reflecting the intense red light of the cabin. I almost fell back from just how much he had startled me. Flam may have been a little odd, but usually he was a gentle person, more awkward and introverted than anything. Flam, what the hell are you doing? They told me that I'm welcome in the depths, he said, turning back to the small window and looking out ahead. I have to see them. Okay, that's not a good idea, man. Come on, you take monitors, I'll take pilot. Let's switch, I said, moving to take the console. I felt a sharp pain in my arm, looking over to see that he had stabbed me with a lab scalpel that he had smuggled on board. I have to see them. The last place uncorrupted by humans. They're waiting for us. He pulled the scalpel from my arm, pointing it at me in warning before turning back to the console. I fell back to the floor, clutching the wound and trying to stem the bleeding. Thinking quick, just trying to live while I still could. I tore my shirt off and wrapped it around the wound, pulling my makeshift tourniquet tight. Stop. Take this privilege, Flam was saying back to me now, voice getting higher and more raving mad with every second that passed. They promised to show me knowledge that humans could only dream of, things that we've had questions for thousands of years. You would pass up this kind of opportunity. Yeah, we're gonna die down here, you idiot. The monitors were flicking, cameras unable to sustain integrity at the increasing depths without proper protection. I could hear the hull clanging as it bent and expanded, trying to keep integrity in the crushing abyss. Flam, what has gotten into you? Shh, look, he said, pointing through the front window now. Beyond him, I could see something in the distance, coming into view better as we got closer. What the hell is this? I was looking downward, our submersible pointed toward the depths as he cut off our lights, plunging us into complete darkness. My eyes took a moment, unable to cut through the most complete, terrifying void of nothing that I've ever seen. Suddenly, something far below us started to glow, starting faint but getting brighter and brighter as it spread, soon covering the entire seafloor. Cracks and veins ran through the light, all meeting in one central point, flowing towards a deep dark chasm that had circled around. My first thought was bioluminescent microorganisms, because we find that all the time in the abyssal zone. This, though, had to be far too large. It would comprise miles and miles of organisms, all glowing in time with each other before stopping at this one deep pit. It was going further than I could see through the viewing window, off to drop further into the depths below. It blinked. At least I assume it blinked. The glowing purple came rushing close from opposite sides, meeting completely over the pit and plunging us into darkness for a moment. When it opens back up almost immediately, I could feel a shockwave hit the submersible moments later. The chasm in the middle started narrowing to a ravine, a deep glow coming from the furthest depths. It reminded me of a cat's eye, but the glowing purple started becoming a deep red. All I could feel from this thing was an intense hatred, like we were bothersome and waking it from a deep nap. I acted as soon as I possibly could, grabbing the small fire extinguisher that we kept at the back and hitting Flam right from behind with it. Thank God it knocked him out immediately, and I was able to take the flight stick, pulling back as hard as possible to return to the surface. The narrowed slit kept watching us as we made the ascent, me praying to whatever gods may be on the surface that it didn't decide to come after us. The damn thing must have taken up most of the seafloor, whatever it was. Flam was grumbling beside me now, saying something that didn't even sound like a language that I knew of. As we rushed to the surface, hull clanging and banging the entire way, I could finally see light beginning to break through the depths, strands of sun filtering down to guide our way. Flipping the comms on, I immediately heard Shannon shouting through the radio, demanding to know what had happened and if we were still alive. Flam tried to kill us, I said, still pulling back as he started coming back to his senses. He looked like he didn't know where he was or how he got there, now mumbling in perfect English about how his head was pounding. We're resurfacing, I'll fill you in once we get there. We pulled up to the surface, Sandy grabbing the sub with the lift on the platform as we got near. As soon as I felt the thump of us settling on the platform, I threw the hatch open and ran out to the sweet surface air. The salty smell of the ocean was one of the most relieving things ever, but knowing that that thing was down there, God, I started babbling to Sandy almost immediately when she ran over, pulling me into a hug as I started crying. Shannon called in a medevac for Flam, who couldn't remember a thing since the night before. It's like he wasn't even in control. That knock to the head is sorting out whatever short circuit was happening. The chopper picked him up a few hours later, still babbling about how he wasn't sure what happened, waking up in the sub as we were tearing through the ocean for the surface. All he could remember was looking out of the porthole in the living quarters last night, his usual routine to relax before falling asleep. He said the last thing he remembered was seeing something out there looking back at him. I gave Shannon and Hap a full rundown, disclosing to the med team that yes, I may have given him potential brain damage. None of them were mad considering the circumstances, but I think Shannon was suspicious. Can't say that I blame her. I told her all about what we saw, but her hard skepticism wouldn't take the idea of an eye covering most of the seafloor. Sandy believed me, thank God. When we talked about it that night, laying in my bunk, I was sobbing uncontrollably because I felt like I was going insane. After I described it to her though, she surprised me. I've seen it too, she whispered, looking me in the eye from across the pillow. Not like you have, but in dreams. It talks to me sometimes, tells me to swim down to it to feel the embrace of the oceans. I don't like it. There was so much hate in it though, I said, grasping for whatever words I could through deep, anxious breaths. It looked like it had nothing but loathing for us. The giants were indifferent, but this thing was angry that we were there. Shh, it's okay, she said again, brushing my hair away from teary eyes. You're going to be okay, it won't come up here. What if it does though, Sandy? It's probably bigger than an entire continent. What if it does come up here? We'll all die, Sandy. I was almost screaming, seeing Hap come around the living quarters hallway with concern on his face. Sandy just shooed him away, making a motion that she had everything handled. If it does, there's not much that we can do, but we can face it together, she said, looking deep into my eyes. It was the first comfort that I had felt since arriving, before seeing what depth of insanity was out here. She kissed me, holding me tight as I fell asleep. A week later, and I'm still holding in there. The eye still looks into me from my dreams every couple of nights, but Sandy's been keeping me company and comforting me through the nightmares. I'm not really for all the romance stuff, but she had me. Something about her just set me at ease whenever I was on edge, no matter what kind of stress I was under. We were hanging out on the deck that night, sparking up again and watching the stars play off the waves as the night grew longer. I thought at first that I was seeing a star on the horizon falling toward Earth, but after a moment she had noticed it too, standing up and looking out toward the horizon. A pyre of flame was heading our way, roaring over the ocean and boiling the waves as it went. I could see huge sails with a Jolly Roger emblazoned on a flag high above, the flames burning it but never making it fade. It kept getting closer and closer, threatening to ram us at high speed as the two of us started screaming for the others to wake up and to get ready for impact. Their screams were audible over the crackling timber and whooshing flames as it came near, and both of us looked back when we heard them. Dozens of people were standing out on the deck of the ship, all doused in flames, burning high into the air alongside the lumber around them. Some were dancing and others were writhing in agony, but all were screaming and shouting to the high moon above like banshees in the night. It was coming at us, speeding ever closer and accelerating the entire time. There was nowhere to go, just Sandy and I stuck there against the platform railing, as far as possible from the sailing inferno. We hugged each other tight, closing our eyes in preparation to be tossed into the waves by a burning juggernaut. It never happened. The ship passed straight through us like we weren't even there. We could feel the heat of the flames, these screams whipping by us as it pulled our screams with it, joining the cacophony of hell on the waves. And then it was gone, racing the other way across the sea towards another destination, screams trailing behind as it sunk over the horizon, water reflecting the pyre even after it was out of sight. "Did you guys hear that?" Hap had said, coming up from the living quarters and rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Dang, it's hot down there too. Sounded like a bunch of screaming. Did something hit us? Is there a breach?" Sandy calmed him before he got panicky, looking at us in the night. "Just us, don't worry. I'll get out here." "Oh, okay," Hap said, starting to turn for the door before letting out a sudden, understanding, "Oh, not like that," Sandy said, shooing him back down to the living quarters as he laughed. We held each other, looking off into the night where the ship had disappeared to before she spoke. "Gotta be honest, that was a new one for me." "Jesus Christ," was all that I could say, heart still racing as I tried to catch my breath. She pulled me closer, brushing my hair back over my ear and humming low, a soothing melody as the night returned to peace, completely undisturbed by the death that just roared through. I don't know if it was the world taking pity on me, keeping any more bad shit from happening for a while, but I was going to take it. Though I did see the giants a few more times, and on occasion when gazing out of the porthole, I would see the giant eye watching us in the distance. A body drifted in near the platform 3 months later, catching in one of the nets. At first we thought it was probably some drowning victim, maybe a suicide that threw themselves into the ocean. They were completely naked, a long pale body shining in the morning glow when Hap at first reported it. Sandy and I went down in the dive suits, pulling it from the tangled safety net and bringing it up the ladder. We noticed immediately when we got to it that it wasn't a normal person though. "What the hell is that?" Hap said, looking at the creature now laid out on the platform. Sandy and I leaned over along with him and Shannon, inspecting the strange being that we found. It was long, probably 9 feet if I had to guess, a humanish torso, or human enough at least. It was extremely lithe, tiny, delicate fins running down the arms and spine, though they were hardly noticeable unless closely inspected. Gills ran from the chest up to the neck, elongated and smooth as it reached the head. Its face was close to ours but with a smooth, almost flattened nose. Larger eyes were situated far apart, almost on either side of the head, while the lower jaw was huge, extremely wide with sharp rows of teeth visible as it jutted out from the upper half of the head. Webbed hands at the end of long arms must have been used for gliding through the water easily. The oddest thing to appear though was that at the waist it became more leathery, long masses of tentacles hanging down from the abdomen. They weren't like octopus tentacles, but the best that I could compare it to was something like that of a lion's mane jellyfish. Long, slender, and pale just like its skin, extending maybe 10 feet longer from the torso at its longest. Is this a mermaid?" Shannon asked in complete disbelief at what was out in front of us. My mind was flashing back to the submarine now, wondering if this was what we had saw on the edge of the cameras before things went to hell. Maybe it was related to the giant eye. "Help me get it to the lab, now." The 4 of us hefted it up, heading right into the base lab and throwing it on the exam table, tentacles falling off the end and curling on the floor below. Shannon grabbed a scalpel immediately, beginning to line it up with the center of the creature's chest. Before she could make the incision even an inch, the creature began to scream, a horrible sound like the screams of a drowning person, sound escaping into bubbles and stifling water even here above the surface. "Holy shit," Sandy shouted, stepping back from the table as it swiped a hand at her. vicious needles at the end of the webbed fingers extending outward like a cat's claws. Hap wasn't so lucky, catching a couple of good slashes on his shoulder as he fell back from the creature. It screamed again, using inhuman strength to heave itself from the table. The tentacles began moving, sliding it across the smooth floor and toward the door, searching for any escape. I was finally able to see the wide-open eyes as it looked back at us. It had fear in its eyes. They were the same glowing purple as what I had seen below, closed into slits once more. It looked like it was barely able to keep its eyes open, likely because of the blinding light up here compared to the depths of the Twilight Zone. The look on its face was frenzied though, obviously struggling to breathe without being in its natural environment below the ocean. I'm not even sure how it was alive, honestly, but it looked like it was fighting for its life to return home. "Stand back! Everybody stand back!" I shouted, raising my hands in a sign of showing the creature that I wasn't going to hurt it. I'm not sure if it got the message because it only backed into the door more before turning to claw at the metal, begging to be let out. I moved toward it slowly, still holding my hands out but now trying to talk it down. Hey, I can help you. Stop for a second and I can let you out." "No, don't let it escape. Do you know what a discovery this is?" Shannon was huffing her way toward me now, trying to pull me back from the thing as it desperately searched for another way out, moving from the door to look out one of the windows. "If you let it out, we can't show anybody what we found." It sliced a hand at the window, scraping against the thick glass to make the worst sound that I've heard in my entire life. I ducked back, covering my head as it pulled a hand back again, this time ramming a huge open palm full force into the glass, shattering it. It pulled itself out, catching tentacles and bleeding deep blue blood as it scraped along the glass. Before we could even open the door, it had dove back into the sea, clearing the safety net with ease and disappearing. Shannon was cursing up a storm, banging her hands on the railing as she screamed to the empty ocean before us. Sandy and I were trying to help Hap out, deep gashes bleeding through and soaking his clothes now. They were only on his shoulder, thankfully, and though it would hurt for a while, he would heal with some bandages and basic first aid. Sandy and I were the only ones keeping cool heads though, because he was in deep shock while Shannon couldn't do anything but rant about her lost discovery. I wish that was the end of it. Shannon became obsessed with trying to find one, taking the tentacles and blood samples it left behind in the window to examine every single thing about them. We got lucky when pulling into the lab because she found a neurotoxin secreted in the tentacles, though it seemed the creature could activate it at will to sting prey. Hard to believe this thing could be that deadly. We weren't able to test the effects of the toxin, of course, but judging from the makeup of it, those caught only lasted long enough to see the jaws close around them. Hap, he started to change. It was subtle at first, his speech and voice becoming odd in what seemed like the development of an acute type of asthma. Trouble breathing, issues with keeping food down, and a persistent headache were the start. Then it became rapid after the 2-month mark, taking slow hold of him. He came into the cafeteria that morning gurgling, saying that he felt like he had aspirated water into his lungs. And then it quickly worsened, with him collapsing to the ground as he stood up to head to the lab. We called Medivac immediately, noting that it was a life or death emergency this time, so they needed to get here ASAP. It didn't matter. Hap collapsed, desperately clutching at his chest for air as he tried ripping through his clothes. I noticed now that his skin was coming up between his fingers, webbing his hands up to the knuckles. As he ripped his shirt off, I saw why he wasn't able to breathe. Huge, slashed gills were opening further into his chest, pulsating as they tried to breathe in through dry air. He was drowning on land, desperately gasping as the oxygen simply had nowhere to go now. I picked him up as fast as I could, desperately trying to drag him out to the water in hopes that it would help. I shouted for Sandy as I went, knowing that Shannon was up in the lab where she wouldn't hear me. As we rushed through the door, I grabbed a life preserver hanging on the railing before jumping over. Hap was barely standing as I pulled, trying to get him over the bars despite how much taller he was than me. The worst happened then. He broke in half, more like just disconnected at the waist. His lower body slid down the deck, hitting the wet floor with a smack. From where his body was severed, I was holding his top half, now dangling down huge, lengthy tentacles that were writhing in agony. I was barely able to hang on as one of them hit me, stinging me on the hand before I dropped into the water, Hap falling after me. We hit the water hard, me barely hanging on to the float as he began gasping in big breaths, voice becoming less drowned and raspy as he did. He was screaming though, face contorting in pain as his skull began shifting, taking on a more aquatic, steam-lined appearance like the creature before. He was drifting away from me now, gasping while squeezing his head. His eyes began to move, sockets widening and stretching outward as they went. His jaw disfigured, jutting out with a sharp snap and pop. I felt myself losing consciousness and then, a woozy feeling overtaking me as the neurotoxin began taking hold from the sting that he gave me. I was slipping in and out, life becoming a dream as Hap's screams faded out on the waves. I felt arms close around me, situating a life vest over my head as I went limp. Sandy's face glowing like an angel through the sea foam as she pulled me up. She took me into the lab, setting me down on an exam table while screaming at Shannon to fix me now. Shannon looked surprised to say the least, and quickly went over to the case nearby, pulling a small vial out and hefting a syringe. I was trying to talk to them, I think, trying to tell them to go after Hap while they still could, but nobody was listening to me. Only Sandy screaming at Shannon as she took a sample from the vial and stabbed it down into me, almost in the middle of my chest. I passed out then. When I came to, the sun was going down and I was being loaded up into the back of a helicopter. Sandy kept getting told to stay back on the raft and that they would report back, but she refused to leave my side. I was numb, almost my entire body completely oblivious to the feelings around me. I couldn't even turn my head, seeing only the ceiling of the helicopter interior and Sandy's face occasionally. She was screaming at Shannon, also sitting on the helicopter crowded in alongside 2 EMTs. "You killed him and might still kill her, all because you couldn't lose your precious discovery. I ought to throw you out over into the ocean right now." Sandy was angry, voice going hoarse as the EMTs begged her to calm down, saying that it could stress me out. Shannon looked dejected, unable to cope with the idea that she had lost one of the biggest breaks of her career. "You were injecting him when you were supposed to be treating him. What in the ever-loving God is wrong with you?" I passed out again, only coming to once more with bright hospital lights above me, machines beeping all around and a tube down my throat. I felt like I couldn't breathe, even with the oxygen streaming in right through the tube, and I tried taking it out myself before somebody grabbed my hand, steadying me. Hey, shh, I got you. Don't do that. You don't want to hurt yourself," Sandy's voice said, her touch guiding my hands back down by my side. Nurse, she's awake." After the doctors took the breathing and feeding tubes out, updating me that I had been in a coma for a week at this point as the toxin worked its way through, I finally got a chance to talk with her. After Hap's injury, Shannon was the one treating him since she had the most human medical knowledge out of all of us. Apparently, after she had used an antidote made up from studying the neurotoxin and blood of the creature to stop the progress on me, she broke down and spilled everything to Sandy, confessing her sins. Every time that she treated Hap, giving him what she assured him to his face were antibiotic shots just to be safe. She was injecting that thing's blood directly into him. I don't know how it did what it did, but I guess after enough time acclimating to the dose, his body just didn't want to stay human. She was the one responsible for everything, from his death to my still recovering state. They haven't found Hap, and still to this day, 3 years later, they've done sweeps of the entire area around Point Nemo, and despite keeping somebody stationed out on the rig, there hasn't been any sight of him out there. I'm still not back to my old self. The numbness comes and goes, usually worse in my extremities. For about 6 months, I was wheelchair bound, unable to walk more than a couple of feet until the atrophy in my muscles caused me to collapse. She's been by my side through all of this though. Every trial since we met on that rig, Sandy's been by my side, even helping me learn how to walk again. I'm at the point now where I'm able to exercise often, finally, and we're both training up to run a marathon in the spring. I guess what made me want to write all of this out was trying to come to terms with what happened out there. I've been in therapy since I was discharged from the hospital, but they would just think some of the stuff I said was a coping mechanism. But she knows and she believes me, and that's all that matters. All these memories came rushing back to me last week when she proposed. We'll be moving off soon, staying in the mountains, far away from the ocean in any direction. The air out there is supposed to be good for me, and the doctor said the elevation should help me get around a lot easier. I still wake up late at night sometimes, the image of that giant eye staring down at me from the abyss, hanging over my head like a ghost. I know that it's not there, not where I am at least. Like she said though, if the thing ever comes up, we'll face it together.